Welcome to this webinar about the UAE market. I see that there are some familiar names already listed in. So hope we're fine now. So we got picture, everything is there in the picture, very good. So once again, welcome. As I said, there are familiar names here attending today, which is always nice. And there's a good number of participants, so I'm very happy for that. I'm the moderator today. My name is Jukka Hahlanterä. I'm running the Dubai EAS office in UAE. And the other moderator today will be Dr. Frank-Fahle from Germela Law. A person I know for some years already, and he's always made a very good presentation. I'm sure it is like that as well this time, and he will more introduce himself when the time comes. Just a couple of practical things. We are more than happy and welcoming questions. There is a Q&A icon below in your screen. So if you want to have a question, please click that icon and type your question. The one practical thing is that while having a presentation on the screen, I can't see, and Dr. Frank-Fahle can't see the questions, but once we stop sharing the screen, I can see the questions, and then I'm more than happy to answer them after each session. So if I will answer your questions after my session, and Dr. Frank-Fahle will do that after his own. So, and what we're trying to do is to give you an understanding of where the market stays right now, where the opportunities lie, and how, and if there are opportunities and you're interested, how would you be able then to enter the market? There are various options for that. So let me start by showing what my presentation will be. I will have 4 parts. I will briefly talk about the economic indicators right now. How does it look like for the economy? A little bit about the opening and easing measures, and I'm sure that Dr. Frank-Fahle will then shed more light on those things in his presentation as well. Then the basic business opportunities that have been there and still will be there and still are there. And then on top of that, the new opportunities that have risen, or let's say rising opportunities that have come up more strongly during the pandemic. Based on the latest information, so the GDP growth in this year for 2020 would be minus 3.5%, which is pretty much the same that a lot of the countries are saying around the world, of course, depending on the country, but the average seems to be somewhere between 3.5 and 5%. And then for 2021, there is a plus of 3.3% expected to happen. That, of course, will depend on how long the pandemic is, how will UAE and the surrounding countries and the world deal with the crisis. The big neighboring country, a big trading partner for UAE, Saudi Arabia, they say that they would only be less 2.3%. And interestingly enough, they say that the sort of decline would be in the non-oil sector rather than the oil sector, which one would expect. And in 2021, another plus 2.9%. They have already had countermeasures, like all the countries, to sort of fight for the economy and for the country's economy as well. And there will be a VAT hike from 5% to 15% during the 1st of July. Now, then the next question would be that, okay, there were 2 countries who raised who sort of set up VAT, one being UAE and the other one being the KSA. What will the UAE do? Now, the UAE Ministry of Economy said that in the case of UAE, there will be no VAT hikes in the foreseeable future. So let's see how that works out. Oil prices now are at 30 to 40 US dollar per barrel level, and they're expected to stay around $45 till the end of 2023. $30 or $40 is enough to give some money, but it's not enough to actually make investments. The level for that would be about $60 per barrel, and that would then actually allow companies to invest. So they will be running the operations, not necessarily investing. In the case of particularly Dubai has a very heavy debt burden already, and it is in the areas of aviation, shipping, and real estate, those being one of the major industries in the whole country. And we are on the whole Emirate, and we are expecting that debt burden to increase during the crisis, and then it remains to be seen how that will be tackled. I'm mentioning here that USD key interest futures are now 100 points. Why am I mentioning that? I'm mentioning that because that gives an indication that the interest level would be staying low for some time to come. And as I'm guessing, and some other people are guessing as well, Dubai and UAE will be borrowing money. So it means that the cost of the money would stay on the low level, which is of course good for the recovery. Then we also know that there was a postponing of Expo 2020 to Expo 2021. What that then of course means is that the expected positive economic boost that was planned to come from Expo 2020 at the end of this year and the beginning of next year will be now shifted by 1 year. But if it happens, so then the money is then coming in. And as I already mentioned, the VAT in Saudis went up to 15%. So this is roughly how it, based on the very latest estimates, would look like. Now the big question is that everybody's asking, I think, in every country, well, when will it end then? When will the pandemic be over? When will the restrictions be over? Nobody knows that for sure, but of course there are a number of guesstimates. I was recently attending a big webinar with about 100 people, basically from food industry, other industries as well, from all around the Southeast Asia and GCC, plus some futurists people there as well. And the guesstimate was that it would actually last for another 4 to 6 months. The second guess was that it will last from 6 to 12 months, and then from 1 to 2 months was then the one that was the least popular of them. So the consensus was that it's 4 to 6 months if UAE continues roughly with the same restrictions right now, or the easing them up a little bit. The other thing from the predictions and the forecast is that the end of the pandemic period is expected to be shorter in GCC than it would be in, let's say, in the sort of the rest of the world on the average. So GCC is expecting a quicker recovery than some other parts of the world. And as I said, that definitely also will be seen. Now, nevertheless, there is business, there will be business. I'm just reminding people of one indicator that is, of course, still valid, is the easiness of doing business ranking. And in that case, UAE has, over the past years, done very well. Last year, they were 21. Sorry, 2018, 2019, it's 16. So what that indicates is that it's pretty easy to do a business or establish a business, but I'm sure that Dr. Frank-Fahle will touch that as well. There are some measures that have been taken in there. And this easiness of doing business index actually is a combination of things like how easy is it to repatriate profits, how easy it is to set up a company, what is the tax environment looking like. So based on those facts, UAE is doing well, and among the GCC countries, it's also doing rather well. Just do a short list of why the ranking has gone up. what has happened lately, starting a business has been made easier by less expensive fees, and lately as some easening measures, so the some of the fees have been totally taken away or they have been reduced. Construction permits, that has been made easier. Protecting minority investors, which is of course always an important things, has been made better by this one particular thing of disqualifying directors in case of judicial conflicts. Paying taxes, so the VAT was introduced last year, or during the last 12 months, it generated 27 billion dirhams for UAE, and that put in euros is roughly 7.5 billion euros. And then trading across borders is also made easier. So these are the kind of things that have been done and sort of get you up in the easiness for doing business. So UAE is doing its best to make it easy. Just a few words. Everybody's trying to ease the situation. So opening up and easing is that there's a few things that I sort of picked up from what has happened. There is an easing of fintech regulations and then adding new functionality to existing legacy systems, so to making everything a little bit more agile. So for a quick financial turnaround, while you're creating more agility in the fintech and more new functionality, so the turnaround would be quicker, and that's one of the reasons why they also expect to come out of the pandemic earlier than some of the other countries, or quicker. There have been measures for preventing price hikes. It started with some of the very simple things like masks, hand disinfectants, so they were controlled so that there wouldn't be any price hikes. Then there are direct and sort of indirect incentives as well, lease deferments and reduction of fees to ease out the situation with the companies. So you might get 1, 2, 3 months without having to pay for your lease, or pay it later, and then some of the fees really have been abolished, or then there's been a reduction or a reduced fee. There has been an extension of resident work visas. That of course has to do with the situation of going out of the country and coming into the country. Coming into the country, I think, might be a little bit more difficult now than actually getting out of the country. But for that reason, so that there's been an extension on the resident work visas. Flexible working force regulations. I think that Constantin, you might maybe touch that if you can, know how working with the workforce and second people getting out and having them holidays will come up. Very good. And there are more incentives coming up. So there's another big package for companies to survive it. And then, of course, what is very important, and it's particularly important during the time of Ramadan, which is there right now for another few days, is the opening of the malls and the parks, with some regulations though. If you want to go to the mall, you have to be under 60 or you have to be over 13 to be able to enter there. So these are some of the things that have been done for opening up. Then I will go through some of the basic business opportunities that have always been there. They haven't gone anywhere. They're still there. Just to short brief on that. All kind of clean tech applications. One of them now, which then coincides with something else in the building, is energy efficiency in high-rise buildings. In many ways, water management of all kinds. So we are talking about white water, we're talking about wastewater, we're talking about the grey water. Well, all solutions that go to that, including irrigation systems, is in demand. Renewable energy solutions, particularly solar, of course, is in demand. Healthcare, not surprisingly enough, have always been a focus area, and even more nowadays. We have some things there like preventive healthcare. I think it's getting more and more important now, and that includes healthy diet, organic food, probiotic food, everything preventive healthcare, So taking care of the sort of society diseases before they actually come, rather than just curing them. The lifestyle diseases, all of them, diabetes, some carcinomas, and some cardiovascular diseases are the ones that we're talking about here. Rehabilitation, particularly for elderly people, which then coincides with the geriatrics and elderly care systems. And then medical technology. Basically, large here we are talking about medical equipment for hospitals and clinics. Then bioeconomy, waste to energy is something that is not that interesting, because there's a lot of energy in UAE, particularly now when the nuclear reactor will be opened and the second one is coming up. So there's a supply of electricity. But the waste to fuel, as funny as it sounds, might sound is one of the things. So you might want to be interested in biofuel, although there's a lot of oil anyway. And then in ICT, I'm also looking at from the point of Estonia, where Estonia has a stronghold, is all e-governance solutions, anything with AI horizontally over all the industries, that together with blockchain and cybersecurity are areas that are always in demand. And then smart grids, when it comes to electricity, because you know there are three ways that you generate, you store the electricity, and then you distribute it. So smart grids is a way that then also coincides with the smart city thing, are in demand. And education, and particularly, of course, lately when Estonia has done extremely well in the PISA measuring. So that's one area where there are always business opportunities. Now, these are the ones that are always there. The ones that I'm going to show you next are also have been there, but now they are rising. So let's start with the with healthcare. Remote care solutions, particularly during the times of pandemic. How can we take care of the patients and follow them and make them do exercises, whatever needs to be done remotely, is an area of interest. Not surprisingly enough, vaccines and testing development, whether we are talking about antibody testing or any of the tests, is of course in high demand. It is in high demand all around the world, but then we also know that when the vaccine comes one way or another, and another one, so who's going to get them? So everybody wants to have a local supply of those things. And then all kind of data metrics for forecasting purposes and seeing what has happened and planning things. Fintech solutions. Let's start with something like mobile paying, online automated services, and mobile security. And all this actually coincides with the fact that UAE is still using, surprisingly, a lot of cash payments, paying with checks, paying with post-dated checks and everything. And during these times, it's more and more important to have everything online, and of course to have so that everybody has an access to those services rather than doing that manually at the teller counter. Then all kind of smart moving during the times when you have to see where people are going, how they are going, and how we could make it optimal. So queuing, people and vehicle flow solutions, and all kind of intelligent tracking systems are the ones that are in demand right now. Then we all know that supply chains in large, whether we talk about industry, whether we talk about food, whether we talk about anything, have changed and become under scrutiny for some kind of new ways of thinking. So there's two things that have gone up, particularly. I also followed two webinars with a lot of people in the food industry. So localized supply for a lot of things, and then all kind of supply chain analytics, and that analytics helping the development of the supply chain and make it more secure would be the ones that are rising right now. Then a little bit more, e-commerce as such has really boomed. So and what do they need right now in UAE? I mean, they need this kind of people, this kind of experts, And why I'm taking that, you can read it. They're all kind of software engineers, whether they are mobile developers, full stack developers, all kind of cloud infrastructure, cybersecurity solutions, BI, data analytics, and then of course all kind of digital product development. Is that if you would be a company that's doing these kind of things, so there might be opportunity here. The opportunity is maybe not so that you would actually try to identify each and everyone who is doing these kind of things, but maybe partner with somebody who can then, through whom you can then offer your services. But how that would be then done, that comes in the next presentation. And then smart construction and building. First of all, wireless monitoring of infrastructures, and then building integrated photovoltaics as a replacement of traditional construction materials. There are solutions from Estonia in that part, and that's a rising trend. And waste to energy technology in a way inside some houses, but as I mentioned earlier, that's not really the big thing. And then optimized cooling and ventilation solutions. This also comes together with the energy efficiency of the high-rise buildings, also with how to control the airflows, where would people be, where is it mostly needed, how do we do that, particularly like in times of pandemic, how do we keep groups of people in a way isolated in need of airflow if needed. So all that would be very much in demand. And that actually concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. As I said, I'm Jukka Hahlanterä. Here's my mobile number. Here's my email address. And I will now stop sharing my screen, and I'll look at if there are any questions, and then I'll try to answer them, and then I'm very happy to give it over to Dr. Frank-Fahle. So just give me a minute. There are something in the chat. But no questions so far. But you can also sort of leave your questions till the end of the webinar, and then we were more than happy to answer them. Constantin, please go ahead.
Jukka, thank you very much. I hope everybody can understand me. Thanks for inviting me to speak. Always a pleasure to work together with you, Jukka, even though we're somehow geographically separated. I think the crisis keeps you in Finland for the moment. As you can see, I'm in my home office already since 6 or 7 weeks now. Even though business is going back, still in the UAE, you're only allowed to operate with 30% of capacity. So for a law firm, that means actually that we give priority to those who are single and don't have that much social contacts. So I have my family here and 3 children. So if you hear some screaming, please excuse. Schools are closed, and they will be closed until September. So that puts young families under enormous pressure. But so far, so good. So I will talk about a little bit about setting up in the UAE. I think Jukka gave you a lot of ideas about opportunities for Estonian companies to invest in the UAE. I think you've very well mentioned also using UAE as sort of a regional hub for doing business with bigger countries such as KSA, most certainly the most important market in the GCC. You touched already upon the oil price, so we don't only have an issue in terms of COVID-19 travel restrictions, which is a big issue at the moment for Dubai in terms of tourism, but also in terms of the oil price crash, which was probably one of the most significant throughout the history. We thought that it was going to go back after the OPEC plus sort of meeting. It did not. My take is that it will not go back, even though there is a cut in oil production. That obviously has a problem and an effect in terms of budget and in terms of what countries are able to spend. Now, Jukka is the economic guy, so I don't want to repeat what he is saying. I'm going to talk about a little bit the regulatory framework, and the most important aspect, as you can see from the agenda, is already understanding that you have opportunities to invest in free zones or in the mainland. A mixture of this would be a dual license where you use a free zone company to invest into the mainland. I'll talk a little bit about the COVID-19 restrictions and about the business reopening guidelines, and then I will just give you an outlook and a conclusion. So I have roughly 27 slides, and I estimate that I need 20 minutes to go through. If you have any questions, as Jukka mentioned, there's a Q&A function within the Zoom application. Just type it in there. It's always easy because then everybody can see it and we can take it from there. So it's important to note that when you want to invest in the UAE, you first of all have to figure out, where do you want to invest? Is it in one of the mainlands, that is one of the 7 Emirates, or do you want to go into one of the free zones? The major difference is actually that within the mainland, you are subject to the so-called commercial companies law, which only allows you to invest 49% of the shares, so own 49% of the shares, so you're a minority shareholder. The other 51% would then need to be held by a UAE national, either a natural person or a judicial legal person. The free zone, on the other hand, allows you 100% foreign ownership, also certain tax exemptions on a potential corporate income tax that might be introduced in the cause of the COVID-19 situation. The IMF, just to brief you on that, has repeatedly said that the UAE should include and introduce a corporate income tax. At the moment, generally speaking, there is no corporate income tax, which means effectively that if you have a profit of 100, you would be able to repatriate that profit to Estonia. And there is also no withholding taxation. So this makes the UAE an extremely interesting destination for investments, regardless of the high costs in terms of lease, etc. But as Jukka mentioned already, there's various initiatives in terms of lowering lease fees, also lowering licensing costs, etc. So keep that in mind. The first free zone actually that was established in the UAE was the Jebel Ali Free Zone. This is sort of has served as a re-export hub for the past 35 years. In particular also to destinations such as Iran and Qatar. As you're aware of, there's certain restraints. There's a crisis between Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other Arab countries such as Egypt and Qatar. So you cannot really do your Qatar business anymore via Dubai and the Jebel Ali Free Zone. Similar restrictions apply with regard to Iran, which are based on the US sanctions law. But generally speaking, Jebel Ali Free Zone is a very interesting free zone. Typically, the free zones are governed by the UAE law and the UAE courts. However, there's 2 prominent free zones, the Dubai International Financial Center and the Abu Dhabi Global Markets, where our law firm is actually incorporated. These free zones, these so-called financial free zones, are governed by common law, and they have their own court system. So they're basically, so to speak, a state within the state. They have their own legal and court system, which can be attractive for some investors. If you build up and you want to structure large-scale investments, you could, for instance, reflect a 5949 structure into one of those free zones and using the corporate law to secure the minority shareholders' position. As I've mentioned, there's certain advantages and disadvantages in the free zone. The most advantage definitely for the free zone is that you can have the 100% foreign ownership. I think one major disadvantage is that you are limited in terms of your scope, your geographic scope. So then the free zone entity is technically only allowed to deal and carry out commercial activities within the boundaries of the respective free zone. So translate that into any mainland customers, it actually means that you're not allowed to deal with mainland customers. It's something different, whereas when you're a service provider, so for instance, a law firm where you write memos, etc., then of course you sit within the free zone and you basically provide your services from the free zone. That's fine if you are installing, let's say, Jukka, you mentioned photovoltaic rooftop aspects, and you're based in the free zone. It would be very hard to go into the mainland and actually install these aspects. So try to understand, where's your customer base, where's your client base. If they are in the mainland, you should opt for a mainland solution. If you want to use the UAE as a regional sort of trading hub, feel free to go into the free zone. The other aspect is that definitely, since much of the market is dominated by governmental spending, most of the governmental bodies would ask you for a mainland trade license in order to pre-qualify. So that would also be sort of a reason to choose for the mainland. But again, as always, typical lawyers answer, it really depends on your business case, on your business model. So you would need to review that against the regulatory framework. Now, this is just a picture of Jebel Ali Free Zone, just to show you the extent. It's certainly one of the biggest sort of harbors in the region. Most significantly, they had issues in terms of trade, in terms of the figures going down on the one hand due to the Qatar crisis that emerged in 2017, and then we had the reinstatement of the Iran sanctions, which also gave a huge layback again. And now, of course, due to COVID-19, we also see further issues. But generally speaking, it's a very significant free zone. So 100% foreign ownership, as we said. What's interesting to see is that a free zone company can set up a branch in the mainland. So you could also opt for a dual setup where you say, we're going to incorporate 100% foreign-owned company, and then you would branch out into the mainland in order to get a mainland license, which some of your customers would actually need. There are various free zones alone in the Emirate of Dubai. There's more than 40, and these are structured around commercial activities. Some of them about commodity trading, Dubai Multi Commodities Center. We have financial free zones, as I mentioned, the DIFC, the ADGM in Abu Dhabi. We have healthcare city. We have internet city. There's tons of free zones, and these typically cater around certain commercial activities. Depending on what you do, if you're in the IT branch, it might be interesting for you to set up in the internet city, for instance. They have certain minimum share capital requirements. So what happens is most of these free zones rely on the normal federal law in terms of the company's law, but they would then add another piece of legislation in order to streamline their own requirements in terms of minimum share capital and or shareholders. You sometimes are not even required to have an office space of your own. You can use flexi desks in order to have a very cheap setup. This having been said, investors should keep in mind that the UAE has issued new economic substance laws that require certain activities, for instance, service centers and distribution centers, to show a certain degree of economic substance. This was all basically launched in light of the Panama paper leaks and is based on a battle against tax evasion. So companies that actually want to use this corporate income tax environment, 0% to their advantage, would need to keep in mind that they, in certain instances, for certain commercial activities, actually cannot rely on this flexi desk aspect. In addition to that, it's worth mentioning that the banking regulations have been tightened, and my take is that they will be even tightened further. So you will have banks that will ask you for certain economic substance as well. Often they will not open a bank account for you if you only have a flexi desk. But regardless of this, you have different options depending on your needs. What's most important, I think, is the exemption for a period typically of 50 years of all corporate income tax, so direct tax. So what does that mean? If you incorporate today and the UAE decides to issue or to install a corporate income tax next year, you would not be subject to this corporate income tax. Now, dual licensing is a very interesting aspect. Now, let's say you really want to come to the UAE, but you have some mainland clients, and for you, it's very important to have 100% foreign ownership. You could opt into the dual licensing initiative, which allows you to branch out into the mainland without actually having to register an office. So you would basically get a second license through the Department of Economic Development. It's important to note that typically the commercial activities for these licenses are restricted. Trading is not allowed, but if you're into after sales, installation, etc., technically speaking, you would be allowed to get a dual license. And the difference is actually that you would not be sort of required to get a second office, and you would get an onshore license. So it depends on the respective free zone, but technically speaking, you would need to apply with your free zone company within the free zone for no objection certificate. You need to get an application for the dual license permit, and then go through the Department of Economic Development. In Dubai, there's only certain free zones, such as Dubai Airport Free Zone. There is the Dubai International Financial Center that is allowing you to the dual license, and you would also have in Abu Dhabi all of the free zones. There's a general decree on that. Now, mainland companies, sorry, there's a typo. I just finished that late night. Mainland companies, as I said, 51% foreign ownership, 51% local ownership, and 49% only for the expatriates. So that requires you to either go through a model that allows the majority ownership for the UAE national, or you need to sort of ensure through side agreements that you have full control also over the 51%. Technically speaking, these are nominee structures that are not allowed by law. Most of the investments that I came across are structured in that way. However, in my view, these are quite on shaky or sandy grounds, because these structures, these side agreements are not enforceable in the courts. It's important to note that in September 2018, the Foreign Direct Investment Law was issued, which allows foreign investors to own up to 100% of the law. The law is restricted to a so-called positive list, which was passed earlier this year in March, and allows you to invest into agriculture, some service sector, and so forth. There's sort of an activity list. I'm happy to share that with you if you're interested in that. But my take is that this is going to be handled very restrictively, because the government does not want to take away this position of having an additional source of income for Emirati investors, 51%. The activity needs to be clearly sort of chosen through one of the Department of Economic Developments. There's 7 for the respective Emirates, and you need further approvals from Dubai Municipality or Abu Dhabi Municipality, depending where you are, Ministry of Labor, and so forth. If you're in a critical sort of industry, such as healthcare, food and beverage, you would obviously also need further approvals, and the costs really depends on what you want to do, whether you want to have further activities, if you're in the oil and gas industry, etc. So there might be additional aspects. So the FTA was then actually enacted in 29. It was passed earlier, but it took over a year to come into place. As I mentioned, we have the agriculture sector, which is benefiting from it, manufacturing and services sector. What is important, trading is not allowed under the law. The law actually requires minimum capital requirements, as you can see, 7.5 to 10 million AED in agriculture, and manufacturing 15 to 100, and services 70, 100 million. So it really depends within the list on the respective activity. What's very interesting to see, and that's new, is that the law says that the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization has the right to specify a minimum percentage of Emirati nationals. So what's very interesting in the UAE is when you compare it with other countries in the GCC, Oman and KSA in particular, that have a very strong approach towards nationalizing the workforce, is that the UAE are quite liberal on this until now. There's basically only 3 pillars of the so-called Emiratization, and that is certain regulatory frameworks in the banking industry, in insurance, but also for certain sized companies. So if you have more than 100 staff, you would need to have a health and safety officer, and so forth. You have some aspects in localization programs, such as ADNOC's in-country value program. This is one thing I work on, specialize on. And then you now have actually the foreign direct investment law that actually potentially tells you that if you have a 100% foreign-owned company, that you would need to employ a certain degree of Emiratis. Typically, the Emirati workforce is paid better than expatriate workforce. Also, you will not be able to get Emiratis for all of the jobs. And it's also very important to note from a legal perspective that the employment protection is much higher for Emiratis than for expatriated workforce. So the FDI law also includes a negative list, and that clearly says that in those aspects, you're not allowed to invest as a foreign investor, banking, financing, investigation, security, military, oil exploration and production, and anything that is sort of relating to religious matters, pilgrimage, and Umrah services. Then also things that actually relate to public services, water and electricity, land and air transportation, postal communications, and so forth. I mean, this is similar to what we see in also in Europe, where we see that there are going to be further restrictions on certain critical infrastructure. Good, I think that's enough on the investment law. COVID-19 restrictions, we've seen a lot. We've seen visa restrictions have been suspended. Inbound flights, it's very difficult, as Jukka mentioned earlier, for him to come back at the moment. Literally, there's two aspects. On the one hand, the regulatory framework, but just the reality that there is no inbound flights at the moment. We see a lot of outbound flights, so expatriates can leave here. There's been a lot of flights organized to France, Germany, Austria, I think to Poland as well, Romania. Emirates Airlines just announced that they would cut up to 30,000 jobs. So that would be a big sort of exodus. There is certain estimations that once the country opens up again, that up to 3 million expatriates, mostly from South Asia and Southeast Asia, would leave the country. And I mean, 3 million in a 11 to 12 million population is quite a lot, just to give you some ideas. We had in Dubai a full lockdown on April 4. That was literally 2 to 3 weeks. We then had the circulars for business reopening issue at the end of April. So Abu Dhabi and Dubai are preparing for business reopening. These basically include, in terms of Abu Dhabi, measures for mall reopening, tenants, and so forth. And we see also included the Ministerial Resolution 281, which actually is very much in line with standards we've seen across the world. Everybody who operates sort of a big shop would need to take the temperature of the potential buyers, the attendees, to rule out that somebody with high fever and or COVID-19 syndromes would enter. We have Dubai economy reopening guidelines, which actually set a whole set of new rules, how businesses in the retail and wholesale, but also transport and logistics, construction and manufacturing, but also in the general offices need to work. For us, this means in particular, we're only able to work at 30% of the capacity. So not everybody can come. We need to ensure that there's a 2-meter distance between our staff, and we are generally not allowed to have any meetings in our office. So we still see these restrictions will also continue after Ramadan. However, the working hours, the opening hours are going to be extended. Now, outlook and conclusion, I think there's still various investment options in the UAE. I would very much encourage you to think as the UAE more as a hub for the entire GCC, even also to serve markets in East Africa and in South Asia. The big times and the golden years in the 90s and the 00s are to my understanding, over. Even though if you have specialized products, I think you could still have very attractive investments here. Even though when we think about the ease of doing business index, Jukka, you referred to, shows that UAE is very high. The incorporation is quite easy, but everything that surrounds that is quite difficult. So in particular, the regulatory landscape is getting more detailed. Just think about the economic substance regulations I mentioned. Think about localization programs in the oil and gas industry that are moving into other sectors, and so forth. They are trying to open up the country towards 100% foreign ownership, but most of the sort of commercial activities that are eligible for this might not be the right one for you. So keep that in mind. And I think just as a sort of final remark, what we will see is, and again, this is very much in line with what you said, Jukka, is these countries that are living largely on public spending will review again the way they spend that money in order to have a more localized approach, so that more jobs will be created here when spending that money. They will look into critical aspects, critical products, in particular in the healthcare industry. If you look at COVID-19 at the moment, to be able to, for instance, produce masks locally at a very short time, just to be able to protect the own population and the economy. Because if there's one sort of unique selling point that the United Arab Emirates has, it's sort of security, and if the security is compromised by something other than a sort of military act or something like a terrorist act. At the moment, what we see, obviously, it's attacked through a virus, and that's something they will certainly not let happen. So I think we will see a relocalization of certain aspects, and that will certainly create new investment possibilities. Good, Jukka, I think that's, I would like to conclude with these remarks, and we see some questions now that are more related, I think, to your expertise in terms of investment opportunities in organic food and so forth. Do you want to take over again, Jukka? Jukka, I think you're still on mute.
Well, I was muted by Mari. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Exactly.
Very good. First of all, let me say just a couple of things. At least my presentation is available for the participants, so we will just have to see how we organize that. So how about your presentation?
Yeah, I'm happy to share the presentation. Not a problem at all.
Wonderful. Very good. And then, of course, you can hopefully be in touch with both of us, separately if you want any legal issues you want to discuss. So please feel free to talk to Dr. Frank-Fahle about that. I have, before I answer that question that I have on the screen, and please keep writing more questions. We are here for a while still. Interesting. What I think the dual license is a good thing. It allows you, as a free trade zone company, to establish a mainland company, as you said, not for trading, but for other purposes like after sales or installations. But of course, it would be a minority holding anyway with that mainland company, wouldn't it?
So the dual license, what it is, it allows you to register a branch. So it would be the branch of a 100% held free zone company. So you have full control. So the only aspect you actually need to, where you need to include a local investor is that you need a so-called local service agent who would help you to, sorry, I was just checking if my microphone was on, but it's on, to help you facilitate visas, work visas, if you need any. But the downside of this is if you need any visa, you would then actually need to lease out office space again. So it's interesting, but it's not. So it's interesting for those who really just need that license to, for instance, pre-qualify. And for those of you who actually carry out installation services in the mainland, then you would actually also need to have a visa of the respective staff who you send onshore that reflects that. So there's still some hiccups with this whole system.
Okay.
So it's what we often see. It's a well-meant sort of step and sort of initiative, but it's not thought through entirely. So it has its downsides. So as I said, the art is, and that's my job, to translate any business case into the appropriate legal structure. So with the information available online, there is a lot available, but typically it does not give you the full picture.
Yeah, okay, got it. So it's kind of practical, but kind of not, as you said, which is a typical way of doing it. Then the other thing, once again, before answering that question, is that there was a plan, and that was like 2 weeks ago, 1.5 weeks ago, but things do change very quickly. There was a plan to let the tourists in from the 1st of July with flights, but now it obviously seems like that's not going to happen.
I'm not sure. I really can't answer this question. What I can tell you is what my experience is that we see, and it's similar to Germany, which is also a federal state. We're sort of entering into a race of reopening certain emirates, and Ras Al Khaimah and Fujairah a couple of weeks ago already sort of reopened their hotels, and then Dubai said, "Well, we're not gonna let that happen." They didn't say that, but that's how they acted, and opened their hotels. And frankly speaking, you know, if you look at what happened in terms of Expo, you mentioned that Expo is not happening this year. Everybody voted to you know, have it in 2021, which is, in my view, the right thing to do. There's so many hotels and alone in the Emirate of Dubai that built up over capacities to be just ready in time. So what we will see is we're going to see a bloodbath. We will see a bloodbath in this industry because people have invested and have invested to be open in time, to have their staff trained for October. And this process has been going on already for the last 18 months, literally speaking. And so it's a way to, you know, on the one hand, save that business and at least mediate that bloodbath, so to speak. But it all depends not only on when Emirates will fly back or Etihad will resume. It will obviously also depend on whether a country like Finland or a country like Estonia will allow them to land there and pick up passengers. So it's not that easy and not a sort of unilateral decision. And on the other hand, I think there's a lot of, you know, international aspects going on in terms of what will be the new standards for traveling. What kind of tests do you need to undertake? You've mentioned that you need certain, you know, official letters allowing you to go back, and you would probably need to do a medical checkup, etc. So what's the new normal in terms of traveling? And Dubai in particular, as an emirate that has built much on tourism in a post-oil world, will need to rely on that, and we'll need to understand that. So if you look at Chinese tourism in particular, which was sort of a solid rock for the last 4 or 5 years, forget about tourism from Europe, right? It was mostly from Asia, and people coming from Asia shopping in these numerous malls. They're not coming at the moment. And the question is, do they want to let them back into the country with all the risks that causes in terms of a second wave, right? So we see a very motivated approach towards reopening it. Jukka, you've probably followed what's happening in KSA. They have said there's a full lockdown during the Eid, which is the end of the Ramadan, where families get together. And when we talk about families, it's hundreds of people literally gathering and celebrating the end of this very important month of fasting. here they haven't done this yet, and people are starting to mix and mingle. And the big question is, will we see a second wave? Will we see another, wave of restrictions? And I'm telling my clients in my employment sort of law webinars that I'm doing like every 2 weeks now, that's great. We've been through the first wave now. Now everybody sort of is a master of crisis management, and it's a good way actually to hit on the pause button and try to understand, what did we do correctly, what was not so good, did we have somebody who was aligning all of the COVID-19 measures, and to try to put in a contingency plan in terms of what happens if we need to react to a second re-lockdown. So that's I think what we need to look at, other than just being super positive. Of course, we all hope that things will go back to normal. I'm not a pessimist, but I am a realist in that sense that this whole thing might come back. If we look at Wuhan at the moment, it looks like there's a second wave there coming.
Yeah, very, very, very true. I mean, it will be interesting seeing what happens during the next 1.5 months by the end of June. Of course, I mean, if you want to open up tourism, and I know there's going to be a bloodbath, exactly as you say, is that, I mean, how can you fill the hotels if you don't let people come in, or make it very, very difficult just to enter the country? So there has to be all kind of easening in there. Great. Hey, thanks for that. Okay, now we have a few questions. I think they are questions for both of us. I'll start with the two first ones. There's a lot of questions about organic food. I can't give you the exact figure of what's the market share of organic food. Let's put it this way. There has been an increasing trend for organic food. It started with the specialty chains, what is mentioned towards the in question number 4, eco shops. But then all the supermarkets started opening up healthy food corners, and they have been increasing in Asian. There's more and more space in the supermarkets for organic and kind of healthy food. The other question, of course, is that not everybody can afford to buy organic or healthy food. It tends to be a little bit more expensive. So we're expecting sort of a smaller amount of people that would be health conscious Emiratis and health conscious expats in certain kind of positions in their work that would be buying those things. Your second question is a definite no. I mean, if cannabis allowed, I mean, definitely not. I mean, that's a pretty big no. The import duties, they would actually depend on what kind of product you're actually having, and then you would have to check that with each and every product. There's a customs webpage and a customs portal where you can actually check by the product group of what the import duty for a certain thing would be. And then, of course, with food, you always have to remember the halal regulations, depending on what kind of food you're actually trying to bring in. And then what I already answered your question number 4 is that yes, all supermarkets are taking over the part of economic health and of health market in the economy. Now the thing is, of course, is that if you look at the big trend, so the big trend is to get rid of the lifestyle diseases, and what means that people, well, UA would like people to be more healthy, to have more exercise and eat more healthy. Basically eat more healthy and then eat health food, because there's a difference between healthy food and health food. Healthy food is anything that's healthy that you eat, and health food is the special things that you can buy on those shops. But the trend is there, and I think it will be bigger. Second question by Jennifer is that what is the market share for beauty and health studios? I don't know what you mean by market share, and I don't have the exact figure, but I would say that the whole UAE is full of beauty salons, beauty studios. I mean, I hear some ladies saying that it's worth just flying to Dubai just to do some of those things because it's so much cheaper in there. There's also health studios. There's a certain sort of segment of the people, particularly young expats, seem to be the ones that are using a lot of the health studios because they want to be want to stay healthy and they want to look healthy, which is one of the things that's typical in that part. That also includes, that also includes yoga and Pilates just coming more and more. Constantin, please.
Yes, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but just to add to that, gyms and health studios and beauty salons, they've been all under full lockdown since the very beginning of the outbreak of COVID-19.
Very true. Very
so
true.
My take is that also there we will see a bloodbath. So there was, in terms of yoga studios, fitness studios, there's rather too many than too little. And with the cash flow effects, the negative cash flow effects in terms of revenue, my take is that these things will be put on new grounds after the COVID-19 crisis. But as of now, they haven't reopened actually. So it will be interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah, well, there's a dual effect. I do agree with you on that. First of all, there's an overcapacity, but part of that is coming back. But then the other thing is that how much of the actual segment that's using those services is going to stay in the country or actually go out. So you might have less people using a huge capacity of services. I think the next question about public procurement from our ambassador is for you, Constantin.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things to say about that. The first aspect is we've seen a huge trend towards using localization programs, which in essence actually built on a so-called localization score, which sort of reflects how much of your business is in the UAE. What degree of footprint do you have in the UAE? And if this is very high, you may have some benefits in terms of procuring and securing tenders because you have some certain rights. This was started by Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC, and then most recently was rolled out in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi also with logistics, Abu Dhabi Port, with construction, other properties, and also into general procurement. That is the Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development. So we can say literally most of the governmental spending that is done in Abu Dhabi is now governed by this so-called in-country value program. And that has a big effect on how bidders will actually need to structure their investments. Now, what does that mean for the rest of the Emirates? My take is that the Emirate of Dubai, but also on the federal level, this ICV program will be rolled out either in as an exact copy or with slight variances, because it's in a very efficient way to actually benchmark how much of the public spending hits ground in the UAE or in the respective emirate. In addition to this, I think health and e-services are already on the line. If you look at how you set up a company nowadays, you need to just upload all of your documents. So in terms of e-services, the UAE is probably one of the most advanced in the whole GCC. And I think this also leaves a lot of sort of opportunities for Estonian companies, because my understanding is that in terms of IT, in terms of programming and having innovative solutions there, Estonian companies are very competitive. So that is definitely something. If you look, Jukka, at Dubai, I think the accelerator, Future Accelerator, they have various sort of forms where they invite people. The ADNOC is certainly a company that is always open for innovation and so forth. In terms of e-health, I'm not entirely sure how that will work out, but I'm sure that sort of generally speaking, COVID-19, as it sort of changes the way we communicate. Normally, we would have had this probably as a normal session somewhere in a hotel, Jukka. Now we're doing it online via Zoom, as many other people are doing it via Zoom. I'm sure that most of you are working with other sort of aspects, Microsoft Teams or whatever. So certainly we will see some e-effects in healthcare industry as well. But what I think is most relevant is that, going back to my example of masks, that certain critical products will be identified by the government, and they will try to build capacities even overcapacities, to be able to react to a crisis like this, to be able to produce this locally and not just depend on sourcing it from East Asia, from South Asia, wherever, and then being in a position where it's basically a battle. I mean, the same thing we will see in terms of once we have the vaccination, right? It's going to be a de facto battle who has the most financial resources, which company actually has the intellectual property rights for it, and so forth. And there's something that I see is that is a position the UAE will not allow. They don't want to see themselves in that position. So my take is that we will see a relocalization sort of certain critical goods. What will that be in detail? I don't know. I'm not that subject matter expert there, but in my view, it would be really critical goods for the healthcare industry, but also maybe spare parts for the oil and gas industry, anything that sort of keeps this country alive. Think about compressors for bottling waters, all of these things. Either you have them in significant amount of numbers in stock to react to a crisis like this, or you're able to produce them locally. And I mean, one aspect that is very interesting, Jukka, you would probably agree, is we're talking a lot about COVID-19, but if you remember back in mid-Jan, we had a situation where we were at the edge of a military conflict with Iran. And we're not only talking about COVID-19 here, we're talking about a region that is very volatile. We're talking about an anticipated trade war between US and China, where we are geographically in the middle of this in terms of trade routes and so forth. So I think all of this will somehow have an effect on how the UAE and how this region will position itself against these potential crises.
Thank you, Constantin. Very, very good answer. I just want to add a couple of things when it comes to whatever as I sort of mentioned in my presentation as well. So there are overall East, as I said, they try to add new functionalities to existing services. There's more agility to the existing services, and that they would be more reachable to everybody. So this is this definite kind of a swift to e-services per se. The other thing is the ICVD country value program. I think, as you said, it will play a very big role in the future. We've seen it, what it means in Saudi Arabia, where it's basically copied from there. That's something that everybody in any sort of a critical industry, or I think in the future, not even the critical industry, have to keep in mind. You also mentioned the Dubai Future Accelerators, DFA, so I have to mention that EAS has a cooperation agreement as a country in residence program with the Dubai Future Foundation, and then under the same umbrella you have Dubai Future Accelerators and everybody else. So we're working in close cooperation with them. So thanks for your answer. I don't see any more answers in the questions and answers. So I think we went a little bit over time, but that was good. I hope all got this part of this information you were looking for. Hopefully, all the information you were looking for. I hope your questions got answered. I want to one more thing. Thank you, Constantin, once again for an excellent presentation. And then, of course, Mari, who has been sort of administrating this whole thing, and all the participants who have been listening to us. As I said, there are always challenges, but Dubai or the Emirates, they won't go anywhere. Maybe we need different kind of ways of doing things, but always in these situations, if something is lost, something new comes up. So everybody, thank you very much. Pleasure doing this, and pleasure being with you. And as I said, the presentations will also be available. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye
Jukka.
now.
Thank you, Marie. Bye-bye.
Bye.